What's up, everyone? I'm your host, Genesis. This is the fourth episode of Introspect. If you're new here, this podcast focuses on topics that I find either interesting, important, or controversial. This one would fall under important because although it's very tragic, it's part of our history as humans. I recently actually just found out about this, and it's just one of those things where you're like, oh shit, like, I have to make an episode on this because do other people know about this? And then I was like, okay, I like these kind of topics, so I might have to start making more episodes on these kind of topics. But I'm sorry, as I was saying, this is one of those things where it's important to use these events as a learning lesson and to make better choices so that this never happens the fuck again. If you're into history or like watching YouTube videos, you might already be familiar with Unit 731. If it's your first time hearing about it, like it was mine, I'm not surprised because like most fucked up things that happen in this world, you have to actively go look for it. It's horrifying, so trigger warning for anyone who's sensitive to these kind of topics. Please click off the episode because trust me, it's not worth it. These atrocious events did happen. These are real events that happen to human beings. Words are not enough to describe how disturbing these experiments were. So please bear with me as we get into this. I'm a very empathic person, so it will be hard for me to describe, but it's necessary that I do so that you get a full understanding of what happened. I will try my best to be respectful and cautious of the words that I use. I will also like to mention that, like I stated, I'm not the most knowledgeable on this topic, so I do recommend looking this up on your own and doing further research, or don't, because the images and details will literally make you sick to your stomach. So, with all of that being said, I will now begin the rundown of Unit 731. Operating from the years 1932 to 1945 in a city in China was a unit of the Imperial Japanese Army called Unit 731, officially known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kuomintang Army. It was a secret biological warfare research unit that conducted inhumane, lethal experiments during and before World War II. This unit was responsible for doing some of the most disturbing acts in history, involving torture, rape, infection, and murders of thousands of people, mainly from the Chinese villages, prisoners of war from Russia, Mongolia, and Koreans, as well as some Japanese political prisoners. That includes women and children. Babies, just throw that in there. Babies, guys. To add a little bit of context to all of this, in 1925, the use of biological and chemical weapons gets banned. So this happened because during World War I, one of the most brutal acts of warfare was the use of chemical weapons. Not every nation agreed to this ban, and one of them being Imperial Japan. During the 1930s, a unit of Japanese researchers began looking into biological warfare, which was led by General Shido Ishii, and he had the full support of the Japanese army. At this point in time, Japan had control of most of China and had believed that biological chemical warfare would help them win the war. This is like a decade before World War II happens. So General Shido Ishii would go on to lead some of the most horrific war crimes in modern history. He had different units in different locations, but primarily the experiments happened in like a underground tunnel under this massive brand new Japanese military research facility, which was actually a cover-up for the public eye. So you know the name that I had mentioned earlier, the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, and the purpose of the research unit and some of the building structures, they were all a lie. They needed subjects to do their research on, and that is where the Chinese civilians, the prisoners of war from different countries that I had stated earlier, women, children, babies, and Japanese political prisoners come in. The number of people who died and were experimented on is believed to be over 300,000, and some say there could be up to 500,000. No one survived these experiments. Remember, guys, this went on for 10 years or more. It was said that once you got into those tunnels, the people that they were experimenting on, their lifespan was not more than like 2 months, guys. They were doing all kinds of experiments. So Depending on which experiment they were doing on you, it's how fast you would die. I will be going over some of the experiments that they did on humans, and if you'd like to click out of this episode, I totally get it, but this is the final warning. So I will be going over why this is the most evil, inhumane, and absolutely disgusting behavior to mankind, and anyone who had any partake in doing these experiments deserved the death penalty. Matter of fact, if you agreed with these experiments, you deserve the death penalty. I don't care. I'm going to try and set the scene a little bit. So the way that they got there is the prisoners would be transported to the front of the facility in a vehicle that had no windows. So if they were to escape, they wouldn't know where this facility was located. Then when they got there, they would put bags over their heads and taken to the underground tunnels. Then they would be placed in cells, and some would be given a vaccine that injected them with various deadly diseases. These diseases were studied to observe their effects on the human body. Some of these diseases included anthrax, a bacterial infection causing severe skin lesions, respiratory failure, and death. Cholera, a waterborne disease that causes severe diarrhea, dehydration, and often death. Typhoid fever, an infection that leads to high fever, abdominal pain, and intestinal damage. Syphilis, transmitted through forced sexual experimentation to study disease progression. Hemorrhagic fever, causing internal bleeding, high fever, and multi-organ fail. Bubonic plague, spread using plague-infected fleas, causing high fever, swollen lymph nodes, and death. Not only did they inject them with diseases, but they'd also expose them to contaminated food and water and plague-infected fleas. They would take the prisoners to a field and throw a hand grenade in the middle. They would set people on fire with flamethrowers and see how long it would take people to burn. They would line people up and shoot them with a rifle and pistol. Mind you, all of these participants were fully aware and conscious during these cruel acts. These so-called researchers would also perform live dissections without anesthesia, take out their organs and stitch them back up to see what would happen. They do frostbite experiments to study how the human body responds to extreme cold. They would do this by placing their limbs in very cold buckets of water. They had various experiments where they took babies that were under a month old and placed them in freezing water just to see how long it would take for them to die of hypothermia. And they also had pregnancy studies where women were forcibly impregnated by either another prisoner held at gunpoint or another guard. And like the other experiments, they would be dissected alive in different points of their pregnancies to see how the fetus was developing, and the ones that weren't were used as a breeding stock so that the researchers had a fresh batch of babies for their other test, like the frostbite experiment. And there's a lot more. They would hang people by their ankles to see how fast the blood would rush through their head. They would decapitate people, and there's a lot more, but I'll let you do the research and look further into it if you want. All of this already enrages me, but you want to know what pisses me off? Besides the fact that this even happened, but it's the fact that when they were caught, many members of 731 were granted immunity by the United States. And if you don't know what immunity means, it means they were granted protection in exchange for their research data, which means most of the perpetrators were never held accountable for their actions. The lead general was granted immunity. That's ridiculous. Some may argue that we needed the data because we needed to gain any advantage over the Soviet Union or any other potential opponent during the early Cold War. But that's stupid. That is a stupid argument because the data was mostly useless. It didn't produce useful data for the medical field other than, I believe, frostbite and maybe like some facts about the human body and some data on biological warfare, which is nowhere near worth the extreme measures that these people had to go through to get this data. It was an excuse to torture and kill people. It was extremely malicious and evil. Alright, I think we should all agree in 2025, right, that using humans as test subjects is flat out immoral, evil, and cruel. Like I stated earlier, these are the kind of events in history that we need to learn from so that this never happens again. Unfortunately, there is a lot of evil in this world, and this is one of those examples. If you stayed to listen to the whole thing, I'm sorry. And thank you for listening. And I hope it didn't disturb you too much. I did leave out some details due to timing, and I know I mentioned it already, but anytime you're interested in a topic, do your own research and dig further into it. You don't know what else you might learn. I'll do more episodes on topics like these. I do enjoy doing them, and I hope you guys enjoy them as well. Thank you for listening. I'll be dropping an episode every week, so if you like these kind of topics, subscribe or follow. You can find this podcast on YouTube and Spotify, and I have an Instagram page as well. Thank you for your support. Until next time, take care. Bye.